Hi, Kathleen.
Hey,
You
Kathleen.
see me? Okay. I don't
I-
see myself, but I see you.
I hadn't heard that whether Liz was or wasn't joining us, but I think because it's 7 o'clock and you have a quorum, I think you actually have to start under.
Okay, we don't pledge, right?
We do not pledge. Not
I didn't think so.
You can
All
call to
right.
order, though.
I will call to order the curriculum meeting for the Board of Education. And I hope all of you got a copy of what we had put together, I think at our last meeting, and it was sometime early spring. It was before we had hired you, Dr. De Silva. And I don't know whether Wes and Allison were part of that, but it was something that we came together. But I think it's so important. And Nora, you weren't part of our group as well. So first of all, I want to welcome this group. I think it's only Rachel, Margaret, and me that were part of this. But I think it's so important now for us to get together and to look at this document in light of where we are, because we've reached a new level of how we reach students, how we teach students. Also, what are the important questions? And as we put this all together, I think there was little administrative input, except for Dr. Pattyfoot, who, of course, was invaluable. But let's look at it, because I think in light of COVID, in light of all the distance learning, in light of everything that is going on, it's an important document to parse and put together as we decide to move forward, and not to just to jump on the bandwagon of everybody's waving a flag, because I think the flags are very different right now. And so I'd like to open it up to the administrators to talk about what they think about it and how they might want to move forward, because I feel we serve at their pleasure.
Thanks, Kathleen. Would you like me to share the curriculum goals that you had sent out earlier? I can just share that so everybody can see it at the same time.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and that'll give Wes and
I think Cheryl sent them to you, but I'm not sure.
I'll share it for just so we can all take a look at the document at the same time. And I apologize in advance for the number of tabs that I have open. So as I say to Margaret, please don't judge me for all the tabs I have open. Here we go. Can you see my screen?
I can. Oh, I'm so glad you can do this, because I wouldn't know how to do it.
Okay, so I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger. Oops. So why don't I give everybody a minute to read that, and then Kathleen, do you want us to talk it through a little bit?
Yeah, let's talk it through. And I think, first of all, in terms of whether we included what you as an administration feel is important for our role. And there are things that, of course, that are our role just because it comes down from, from statute. But also, I think, as you know, things have changed. And after you've read this, I can give you a little summary, and so can Margaret, of how this is a very new committee and how it has worked in the past. Don't you agree, Margaret? What are we, less than a year and a half old?
Yes.
And often it was the assistant superintendent presenting, as well as with Allison and maybe Wes. I don't think it was before you were there, Wes, but presenting things and looking at data and looking at new curricula and all of that. But I don't know if our work has ever encompassed what this says.
So I'm just going to speak to it a little bit, Kathleen, is that I haven't experienced a curriculum committee even as an assistant superintendent. So a lot of what you describe in your mission there, the goals, is what, in my experience, we would present to the full board. So there isn't anything necessarily that I would be concerned with that's on the document. I think what would be important, at least from my point of view, and the assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, and I'll talk about that in a minute, would be that the timing of the way in which the curriculum committees meet wouldn't impact our ability to deliver the information to the full board. And obviously that could apply to any committee, but I think in particular with the curriculum committee, that would be just something that, having been in that role as the assistant superintendent, would be important. I'll speak for whoever's going to be in that role, is that, and I'll speak to that actually in a second as well. But the role of the assistant superintendent for delivering information to the board can matter, especially if you're in the budget process. So that would be my only, not so much a concern, but just for a matter of discussion. We currently are, Craig Cruller, our assistant superintendent, has resigned effective December 24th. So we will be in the process of searching for a new assistant superintendent. We wish Mr. Cruller well in his future endeavors. And that posting actually just was posted, I believe, yesterday. So I know that individual, whoever that is, will want to have a voice in the process. That said, there are a couple of things that I think would be helpful to that individual, or certainly to me, to Wes, to Allison, with respect to a committee such as this, would be to talk through questions that might come up that the full board would perhaps want answered, and giving us an opportunity to have those questions ahead of time, right? So sometimes when we come to a full board, or at least in my experience, when I've come to the full board, it's nice to anticipate the questions in advance so that we can be as prepared as possible. So I think that would be helpful. There's a couple of items that I know that are important at this juncture for the district. One is just organizationally how we're functioning, and some strengths that I've noticed, and some challenges, which I can talk through in a little while. And then just the curriculum process. So I know that there was a discussion, at least maybe it could have even happened earlier. I believe it happened. I heard it at some board meeting that I wasn't a part of, but was eavesdropping before my time here, where there was a discussion around a 5-year cycle for curriculum writing or curriculum revising. And what I might suggest is that isn't the most authentic and or responsive model. And I'll share, if we have time tonight, if not at our next meeting, I'll share what I would consider more of a responsive model. And the reason I suggest that a 5-year cycle, or a 3-year cycle, or a 10-year cycle, whatever year you want to attach to it, doesn't meet the needs of a community and or kids, is because it's assuming that you're not going to touch that curriculum until that particular period of time, and that there's sort of like a closed door on the work that happens. And so if we have time tonight, I'll share a very, very messy working draft that we've discussed between Wes and Allison and I, and how that it lines up actually to the document that you just shared, Kathleen, but could also line up to the work that happens here. The other thing that I would say is that that's an important piece for what I believe is missing right now, and I think it's just because of the nature of what's happening, but is that the updates to the Board of Education, to a curriculum committee, to whomever, shouldn't happen as a result of a budget. It should be happening throughout the course of a school year, all of the time. And so how we do that, I think, is incredibly important. And the reason I feel like I could say that with some level of confidence is because the questions that I heard from families during my entry plan work were really they highly involved questions that in my mind, I felt like they should have been answered at some point publicly. And so, however this process works, whether it's through this committee or through the full board, that updates should be happening often and frequently, and we should be circling back on things. So if we purchase textbooks, for example, because we've gone through a math research team, we should be updating the Board of Education on why we purchased that textbook, how is it going, how is it connected to the standards, et cetera, et cetera. So those are just the small vignettes that I think are important to wherever we land here. And so you can give me your insight as a committee, and glad to answer any questions.
Does anybody have questions? Excuse me. Does anybody have any questions? At this point, I think we were looking for guidance as well as a new committee, and the paradigm that was existing did not work for us. So I'm so happy to have a paradigm shift. Anyway, go ahead, Nora.
I was just going to ask how the decision came about to have the curriculum committee, if it's actually not a common practice in other districts.
Well, Margaret, you and I heard, particularly from Dr. Collins, that it's actually one of the committees that is required.
Right.
And our district never had one. And Dr. De Silva, you can correct us if we're wrong, but I think if I went and did a little research, and it seems as if it's one of those that is required.
Yeah, Tom Mooney's book seems to have it there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and I think that there's benefits so long as the committee functions well and doesn't slow down the work. And I think that's really important, having sat in that role. And by the way, I've worked with communities that did have curriculum committees, and then they disbanded them because it did slow down the work, and we're spending time with commas and periods, and the curriculum work wasn't happening. And so I think that's just an important piece. Not that I would suggest that there isn't value. I think that there could be value to having this committee here, a lot of value actually, especially when we're quite frankly, like the committees that I've been a part of thus far. So for example, the Budget and Finance Committee and the Policy Committee, having that legwork done in advance before you get to the full board helps answer, clarify, generate the questions that the public may be thinking about or the Board of Education may be thinking about. So I think it's, so long as we continue with that type of lens, then I think that the work can be really powerful.
Yeah, I just have a sort of a comment and more than a question. I think, if you listen to the feedback from the community, and some of this is legacy, pre Dr. De Silva, let's just say, there was a lot of concern within the community, stakeholders, parents, about the curriculum and the lack of clarity, the constant changes, the use of certain curriculum materials and strategies that didn't seem to be having a positive impact on math and reading. And so there was a lot of parental concern. Certainly since I've been in Ridgefield, that's one of the primary pieces of feedback I've gotten from other parents. And so, it could have been that Dr. Collins was hearing that as well and thought this might be a way to continue to have a better liaison conversation with the community as well, and hear that feedback maybe a little less, in a smaller format. I want to make sure that that's noted as well, because it's not going to go away just because the superintendent changed. I do think that there's been a lack of cohesive curriculum strategy that's been very clear and transparent to parents. And so that is something that I think we do need to consider, whether it's in this committee or as a administrative plus board, whatever. I wouldn't underestimate the change management components of that as you start to create that strategy in a more positive way.
Liz, let me just comment on that. I think you're 100% accurate in terms of your perspective on what the community has felt around curriculum being presented, them having a bigger, broader picture. Because I think a lot of the questions around some of the resources that we're using would be answered had there, again, not, the key piece is not a part of the budget process. And that is, for me, and again, the timing isn't perfect because guess what? We're starting in about a week is the budget, right? And so that being said, I think that there's a lot of feedback that I've received, whether formally or informally, or from my own research, that suggests that it's important, whatever systematic way we do it, there has to be a systematic way in which we're sharing out the work that's happening in our schools, K-12. And so I think in terms of priorities for me, right now, there are a couple. So obviously we're in the search for an assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction. That's a key role in our district. And so having a person, the right person in the seat doing the work, will bring an incredible value to this committee and certainly to my counterparts that are on this line. So that's just an underlying foundational piece. The second part of this is that I have been looking at the organizational chart the organizational structure that we have here in Ridgefield, and that's from the director of technology that we've yet to fill, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, to just the curriculum positions in general. And so I've been working alongside my colleagues on an organizational chart that I would like to bring to this committee the next time we meet to share some of my thinking, because I think that there are pieces that will have a domino effect on other positions in the district that I think it's incredibly important to have a discussion around. Budget or not budget, right? So whether they're budget neutral or not budget neutral, or have a budget impact or don't, it's important that I collect the feedback. Along those lines, one of the positions that I have been challenged to fill has been the director of instructional technology. And the reason I believe that position has been hard to fill is because I do believe that there's a couple of reasons. I think that number one, it's asking a lot of one person. It's asking a person to be the front face of instructional technology, to be an innovator, to be an out of the box thinker, to be creative, to be thinking about the next innovation in instructional technology, right? And all the pieces that come with that, how best to use the technology in the classroom, et cetera, while at the same time having somebody on that knows enough about the back end or can lead that. And I think that that's been a hard person to find. And so some people are stronger in one area than the other, or vice versa. And so we just haven't found the right fit, and quite frankly, the right fit for Ridgefield based on the information that we have thus far. And so I have revisited that position and changed the job description a bit. But as I mentioned, it does have a bit of a domino effect on other positions, in particular, the area of STEM. So I've been looking at how STEM could fit into the director of instructional technology and what that actually means, and just innovation with courses and all of the above. So that's one piece, and that'll come to you if not sooner than our next curriculum meeting. The second piece is that curriculum revision process. So I can share a messy draft that came from the work that I did in another district for you all to take a look at and maybe ask some questions about, because I think it will help clarify the work that happens here and then subsequently to the larger board. Would you like me to do that? Okay.
Yes, I would.
Okay, so I'm just going to try to find my tab here before I decide to share my screen. Okay. Let me know if you can see it. Can you see the document?
I can.
Yep.
Okay.
Everyone else?
You got it. Yep. Okay. It says Ridgefield Public Schools on the top, working draft. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because I can't see you now, so I'm just looking at the document. So if you can just equate this to what, this is what some people might describe as their curriculum revision process, like a 5-year cycle. Some people might describe it that way. This model is very different than that. So during that September, October month, the K-12 curriculum leaders, whoever those individuals are, come together, and what they look at is a district yearly plan, which is a separate piece of work. They look at any standards or frameworks. Have there been any new standards in mathematics and English language arts? Or do we have new social studies frameworks? Is there anything new happening? How has that impacted any other previous curriculum? Actually, let me just see if I have another document that I could kind of give you may not have it open. No, I don't have it open, but it gives, it will give us a sense based off of this first document, how many grade levels have had their curriculum revised and when was that revised? So did I just revise a new unit in kindergarten in English? And if I did, was it fully revised? Did I just make tweaks? Was that happening this past summer? Did it happen 3 years ago? Does it need to be revisited? And we're all having this discussion together. Then there may be some district initiatives. There may be something like technology or something that's happening with STEM, or there's other goals that the Board of Education or the curriculum leaders have identified as being important. It could just be a technique. So we're going to try to look at more student-centered learning. And what does that mean? And then we look at our budget, right? How much do we budget? What are the priorities within our budget? And based off of that, obviously, we have to make some decisions. What is our student learning data telling us? How did our students perform this past spring if we have that data in front of us? Usually we get it sometime late August. What is our interim assessment data telling us? What is our data on from MTSS telling us? What is the data for our students who have individualized education plans telling us? How are their growth targets looking? What is the student and teacher feedback? Are kids saying this? Are they saying that? Or are teachers saying there's too much curriculum, I can't get through it. The units were too long. Some units were too short. I felt like kids developmentally didn't have an opportunity to do A, B, or C. So what is that feedback telling us? And we collect that feedback typically in June. So there's some type of structure that happens where we're collecting feedback from our teachers and getting their insights from how the year went. And we're collecting it all along the way, but summarizing it in June and then coming to the September, October meeting. And what are some of the department priorities or goals? So the department goals in mathematics may be different based on what those leaders or those department heads or the administrators may be noticing. They may be noticing in mathematics that a priority is to work collaboratively more. Perhaps in science, they're saying, you know what, we needed to embed technology more. And based off of all of that work, then they move into the next phase. And that's where really they prioritize and identify next steps. From that process, there's a preliminary curriculum development where capacity awareness is helping us understand what do people know about next generation science standards? What a kindergarten teacher may know versus a secondary educator? What is the capacity that we might need to develop depending upon where we landed with our priorities? And again, we may have priorities in some grades and perhaps none in others. During the preliminary curriculum development, we establish a scope and sequence. We start to align standards if it's necessary. And we create a writing plan. A curriculum writing plan. Who's going to be on the curriculum team? When does it happen? What are the budget implications for that curriculum writing team? Traditionally, teachers are a part of the curriculum writing because they're the ones that have to implement it. They're the ones that often turnkey the professional learning to their colleagues. And then you begin writing the curriculum. So it's either new or perhaps there's some revisions. It's not new curriculum, but it's just revisions, which right now, for we don't have any new standards in science, English, math, or social studies. So it's likely revising something. We're either revising the scope and sequence. We may be revising units. We identify what teacher resources we may need. This is where you might identify that we've revised the curriculum in mathematics and now the textbook is no longer appropriate, or perhaps we are using so many outside resources that there isn't fidelity, and so we need to look at a new textbook. That's where it might come in here. And then we develop a professional learning plan. From there, we present the curriculum to our colleagues. We implement the curriculum, we collect feedback, we make revisions based on that feedback. We share the curriculum with the Board of Education as it's appropriate. If it's new or revisions, we let them know that. We help them understand where that process is looking. And then we go back right to the beginning, right? So we're back in the spring doing the exact same work we did in the fall. So it's cyclical in that way. Now, it's a draft because this is where I might see where my vision might be, but then person sitting in that assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction may see it a little bit differently, may have some tweaks on that. I would suggest that most models that have a year attached to it, like I said before, a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year, 5 years, the most traditional curriculum revision plan, aren't the most progressive models because they're basically ignoring anything that's happened in between. They're ignoring that students may be falling apart on that SBAC data, despite the fact that we revised the curriculum this past year. So we're not going to revise it for another 5 years, even though kids clearly are falling apart because they don't have number sense or their computation skills, or perhaps their ability to write long isn't there. So this type of model, again, someone will come and tweak it and make it better, I have no doubt. But this type of model, what it does allow you to do is be as responsive as possible. And once you've identified those priorities, a Board of Education, a curriculum committee can say, okay, we understand what the priorities are going to be for this year. We're not going to hear about every single curriculum area across every single content area, of course, across every grade, because that's not reasonable to do. But we do know that next year we're looking at our phonics program in our elementary school. And so therefore that's a priority. So I'm going to expect a couple times during the school year that I'm going to get some type of update on that phonics program. And I guess with this committee, where I might see this committee finding a place would be that we would share that work with you if possible in advance of sharing it with the Board of Education, anticipating some of the questions, concerns, et cetera, that may arise, or things that we didn't think about, right? Because that's often what happens in these committees, is that there's things that we haven't thought about that we should be thinking about.
I so thank you, because it puts such an emphasis on the work that the educators are doing, and that it clarifies what our work is. Because even though some of us have come out of the educational field, I've always felt that my role was not to question what was happening, but to listen and to provide the questions, so to fine tune and hopefully that the work serves all of our students. So I really appreciate this. And also the clarity of not waiting 5 years. I mean, I think that's brilliant. It's what I would think of as a former educator, and even if I were a member of the community. So I think there's so much here. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts. Any questions? You were very clear. I took a lot of notes, so. But I think the whole thing is what I was always hoping, having worked in schools but who had board of trustees, not, not elected boards, that it was always that fine line of informing the board, having the board ask the questions, but not making it happen, because it's to listen to those that have been, who are doing the work, and to ask those, questions of how we're spending the money to make that work be the most bang for the buck and the best for all of our students. So I think that's where we're headed. I mean, that's really a short synopsis, but. And I think what I'm hearing from you is that it's so important that the new assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction be part of our work as we move forward. So I don't even know if it would behoove us to meet until that person is in the position. And any other thoughts about this? Rachel.
I would agree with what you're saying, Kathleen. And I think Dr. De Silva, you put, like Kathleen had said, great emphasis around the revision process, the responsive process. a lot of my thinking actually correlated to what Liz was talking about before, about the families in the community having questions about our curriculum. For instance, I wrote a lot of notes for tonight, and I was wondering about our math program and our literacy program, and if we have seen regression with our students when it comes to math skills, literacy skills due to COVID, and a shifting in between learning models, and how can technology support our students and help our teachers differentiate the curriculum for our students. I was trying to think about the goal that we had written down, Kathleen, last spring. And then also looking at technology, I believe that we could take an in-depth look here in this committee before bringing it to the full board on technology and how RPS is supporting the vision of the graduate, and how has COVID impacted how we use technology to teach, perhaps even breaking it down, hardware, software, apps, pre-K to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 12. And in the end, my hopes would be that we would have a comprehensive look at our K-12 program, which would include 18 to 21, and to see the scope and sequence of the different technologies we use, as well as supports to differentiate the curriculum for all learners in person and virtual. So I was trying to think about curriculum and how we can, how our staff, how RPS is accessing it to teach children right now in the world that we live in.
So you had a lot of good points there, Rachel, and I think that what my takeaway from that actually brings me to an earlier meeting I had with a school principal around their goals for the year and how tricky they are this year around student data. So we're in the process right now of implementing a universal screener, and and again, I don't know what the history is in terms of the Board of Education understanding what the universal screeners are intended for, what they're not intended for, their purpose, or of the like, but we're in the process of implementing our universal screener. And what those are intended to do is to give us an understanding of where our students' performance are on a skill-based assessment that's universally provided to kids. So I think that data will be important for us to see where our students are now in comparison to where they were last year. We didn't implement that same universal screener in the spring, as you know, because we weren't here. And it wasn't appropriate to do remotely, I think, or at least that's what was deemed at that time. And so I think that data will be interesting to see and determine where we are. What's really hard about the current environment is that our teachers are doing some compacting, there's no doubt. And, Allison and Wes could certainly speak to that. And so Allison and Wes jump in where it's appropriate to do so. So they have had to compact their curriculum. They can't teach in the same way because it's taking them a half an hour to wash their hands in some classes. And so for anyone to come away thinking that we're going to achieve, however way you define achievement, whether that's academic achievement, thinking achievement, et cetera, in the same way we have in the past, I think is just, and that's in every community. It's not limited to Ridgefield. And it's certainly not because our educators aren't working their hardest and our kids and families aren't working their hardest, but there's a lot of inconsistency. They've had to change learning models. They're not physically in school every day, 6 through 12. Our little ones just came out. And so as a result of that, just that alone and that inconsistent, we know that children thrive, all children, even adults, right? But certainly children thrive on routines and structures. We know that right from the beginning of their life, that's where they benefit the most. They know what to expect and they thrive in that way. We have not been able to provide that in the same way that we're used to. We've tried, of course, but that is an important element to where we are. I think technology is an important discussion point, Rachel. I think that's another piece that, again, waiting for the person in the seat to be able to describe some of what's happening. And it just reminds me of those earlier discussions that you all had in the spring around screen time. And we're talking about screen time so differently now because we don't have a choice, right? So I think that's an important part. And actually, Wes and I had a conversation about this recently as well about screen time. And Wes, I don't know if you want to weigh in there, and Allison, go ahead, jump in if you want around compacting the curriculum. But
yeah, so I'll compact it. But if you've been listening to the podcast, Ridgefield Tiger Talk, available on all major platforms, this is something we've actually brought up. So a great example would be elementary math, right? It's always been a hot button topic. The state actually recognized, and we were doing the work with our math specialists to find out quote, unquote, priority standards. And about a week ago, the state actually updated their curriculum website for math priority standards, because the state realizes what Dr. Silva just said, we're a half hour for hand washing, decreased time in classroom from the teacher. And remember, the teacher not only is differentiating to a classroom, but you add the abstraction layer of having to differentiate to distance learners at the same time, learning new technology. We just can't cover the same amount of content. That being said, the state did not give priority standards for all topics. It was right now, it's just for math. We don't know if they're going to do anything with the other subject areas, but this is something we're focusing in. And it was just for elementary, or K through 12 math, and everything else is kind of, in a limbo and getting that information. When it comes to technology, we're doing the same thing. We have approved many different learning platforms and systems, and we're having a lot of the teachers be highly dynamic in finding these new technologies to integrate with their learning styles and the content that they need to go through. I think in what Susie was saying in the documents she was showing earlier and how we should develop curriculum, it's he who travels lightest travels swiftest. And what we've learned in these silver linings of this thing is we just do it, right? We're going to try it. We're going to do it. You have a few teachers kind of beta test it. Hey, it's great. Hey, it didn't work. Didn't throw it out. It's great. Everyone gets it. And we've been pretty good at that. But that's where I'm coming from in this point in time at right now.
Yeah, and I'll second a lot of what Wes just mentioned there, and he said the word silver lining. I think even as volatile as the moment is right now with all of COVID and being hybrid or whatever it may be, what it has forced all of our faculty to do is to really become flexible and adaptable, not only in the way that they've been teaching in the classroom, but also how they're looking at the actual information that they're working with to give to students, how to set up different models for students to really engage and find it relevant, and to actually find the time on screen important to them so that they actually want to engage when they're at home. So with everything that Susie just mentioned about the very, very current and very cyclical kind of curriculum watch, as well as taking a look at reorganization or just how curriculum needs to be compacted to really maximize our student experiences, I think our faculty have really stepped up to the plate. They're tired at the end of the day. They're tired at the end of the week. And it's because they care so much. So it's great, even though not everything's, exactly how we need it to be. They know they have to look at it, and they know that we're using this year to figure it out so that we give the best possible experience.
Rachel, you made me think about something, and actually Liz, that is not a part of that responsive curriculum document, but is a real critical piece, is that when you implement, so you have a new curriculum, and when you implement a new resource that goes alongside that curriculum, that scope and sequence, it's really important that families understand what that resource is. So let's just use Math and Focus as an example, which we use ish at our elementary. That was ISH, ish at our elementary level. Math and Focus in many districts, Singapore Math, also known as, doesn't always stick. And the reason it doesn't stick in some districts is for primarily two reasons, or maybe three. The first is typically the rollout, is that it's rolled out with too many grade levels at one time. So there's gaps, it's overwhelming, there's not, which is the second part, which is the PD, is your ability to provide professional learning to faculty is incredibly important. And then the third piece, which is the piece that's not part of that model, but should be mentioned, is parents, and helping parents understand that when you teach differently, let's say math, than perhaps the way in which I've learned, and I think the way in which some of you all learn mathematics, it's important that families understand that, because when a child is coming home and struggling with their homework because they can't create a bar model, because you as a parent have never seen that, and some of these 5th grade problems all of a sudden are incredibly hard, and you're trying to find the algorithm in which to solve it, is an important element of why some of these programs, Math in Focus just happens to be one example, but it can be any example. It could be Teachers College, right? There's been a lot of discussion around Teachers College this past spring. Whether you like it or don't like it, it's really important that you understand it and you understand where it falls within a balanced literacy framework, because it's one piece. Again, you can dislike it, you can disagree, but it is really important for families to understand that. Something like Teachers College, or the work of Teachers College in isolation outside of phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, or phonics is not good enough. We all know that, right? The research says that, anything you read says that. But the parent piece in helping them understand has to be a part of any part of that process. So whether that's parent workshops, whether that's parents coming in and actually working through a 2nd grade problem in mathematics with your math coaches or your math interventionists to help guide them so that they know how to support their children at home, is a really critical piece, because it answers the concerns that Liz brought up right at the beginning, and it answers some of your questions, Rachel, about what's happening in mathematics, what's happening in phonics. And those are real questions. And again, it's not because people aren't being creative or working hard. All of those things are happening, but how are we delivering that to the broader community so that everybody understands? And again, if people want to know what they're paying for too, right? Because they can rally behind that when they understand what they're paying for.
Agreed.
No, I agree. And thank you all for the feedback. And, Rachel, you brought up a point that I've been thinking about, particularly because in my old life for years, I was a K-1-2 teacher. And I know Dr. De Silva as well. And I'm so happy that we're really focusing on having them as much as possible, because I know there's also that developmental time, 5, 6, 7, particularly for literacy. And that, we're really looking at that, because, and I'm not looking at our district as much as the whole country, because I really worry a lot about that. And I think, that can be something that we can talk about is, how to get these kids so at least they are not going to be the laggers when it gets to the different developmental stages. So there's so much. And I thank you, Rachel, for referring to those pieces, because that's one of my biggest worries. And it's not just for our district, but everyone. So I think at this point, if anybody doesn't have any other questions or understanding, I mean, as we're moving forward, do people feel what has been written, which is pretty broad, with broad strokes, can be put forth as our goals and purpose? And then from that, I would love if Dr. De Silva, if you could share the piece that you shared about the outline, and you can say very broadly across it, outline just to our team and not to be shared, so that we can look at it more closely. That would be very helpful. I mean, I took a lot of notes, but I just saw that. I think that would be an important piece. And then we can decide when we would meet again, or whether we would be, I'm sure some of us would be part of the process as you move forward for the hiring. So I'm just leaving it out there for everyone.
So I think what would be helpful also is the next time we come together, if I could have an opportunity, again, outside of the budget process, to share my vision for the organizational structure.
Oh, right.
The curriculum and instruction team, because I do feel that that's,
yes,
it's an incredibly important piece as we move forward. And I don't want it to get lost that this is becoming a budget thing rather than what I believe is a benefit to the district in terms of understanding and having a focus on the different levels and the different content areas. And as I mentioned earlier, the technology position and making a shift of what that role should really look like, so that it could really meet the needs of our students. And I think part of the evolution that has come into even just my mindset around that has been where we are now with technology, which is very, very different than where we were a year ago. And I think it's different for everybody on this screen. And we've seen many hindrances that have come as a result of this environment, but we've also seen some possibilities. And I think this is our opportunity to take advantage of having somebody lead and be really creative and innovative around instructional technology and operations.
No, thank you for reminding me of that. And I agree. Maybe we can have our next meeting in December and share those, the organizational structure. And I also, again, coming from the independent school world, see a committee like ours, at least where I used to be, is not only, thinking about the budget process, but being the understanding group who can be the spokespeople for the Board of Education when questions arise, and because we are knowing about this and we can talk to the community. So I think the more that we are informed, the better informed we can inform the community. So I think it's a very important piece. So I agree with you. Maybe the next meeting would be looking, because are you going to start searching now, or are you going to wait till after December 24th?
The search has begun. It actually was posted. It was posted yesterday. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So that's good. But the next meeting, I would love
time since then, just to see who's in there. I've checked every system we have to post it on. So yes, it's posted.
So I think the next committee meeting can be about the organizational structure, because that's going to set up the whole thinking of how the rest of this work, rolls out. Any other thoughts? Nora, Margaret, Liz, Rachel, administration? No? Well, first of all, I want to thank you all. And it's kind of exciting to be able to really, revisit this and re-envision it and make it so that it works for everyone, and particularly for our kids. Anybody else? Well, then I call for, anybody want to adjourn?
Adjourn.
Okay, and I'll write up the notes and send them to Cheryl.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, everybody.
Good night, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Have a great night.
Good night, everybody.